All right, so the real cost of security. First, a little bit about the 451 group, and I am in 451 research, which is one branch of the 451 group. We do a lot of stuff, including we have our Uptime Institute that does tier certification for physical data centers. We acquired Yankee Group, who you probably heard of, either this year or last year. I'm trying to remember. They cover mostly mobility these days, and underneath 451 research, we cover pretty much everything else in what we call the digital infrastructure, you know, from power all the way up to layer 8 or layer 9 maybe. So I wrote a paper. This is a long paper. What I did was I polled a bunch of security professionals, people we know and love in the community, and I had this question to ask them. I'm a new CISO in a 1,000-person enterprise that has never done security before. I have a blank check. Now, I know this never happens in real life, but I wanted to get rid of the financial considerations, and I'm asking you as a consultant to tell me what to buy. And you would not believe the range of reactions that I got just to this question. I got a lot of suspicion. One person said, oh, this would never happen. That's a ridiculous situation. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what happened to me when I started at the Texas Education Agency on my first day. I was the only security person, and they said, we need your budget request by the end of business today. So it really does happen. And I still have people calling me, consultants who say, I'm working with a new client, they've never done security, I got to make a list for them of what they need to buy so they can budget for it. Tell me, you know, can you help me make a list? So this really does happen, and it happens all the time. One of my favorite reactions was this one. I hate this survey because it assumes that everyone and everything is the same, and it asks me for an exhaustive list I can't possibly provide, and I will, of course, forget 3/4 of what I always talk about, and there's no way I can answer it. This was from none other than somebody we know and love, Nick Selby, who was actually the very first research director of the enterprise security practice at 451. He was the one who convinced me to become an analyst. But he's a cranky guy, as you can tell, and he doesn't hold back. But you have to sort of ask yourself, why was he so annoyed? I sent him this in writing. You know, did he not have Google? You know, why was this so hard? I was not on stage with him holding a taser to his butt and saying, you have to make a list right now. Why did this annoy him so much? Why is this so hard? Here's another reaction that I got. Now, I got all sorts of things. There were some people who suggested buying as few as 4 different technologies, and one person recommended as many as 31 separate technologies. Now, you can tell that this person was from a really rich organization, and they could afford to buy one of everything, and they often did. Everybody's response reflected their experience, where they worked, what they were used to. So this one said, before I bought anything, I would invest in a BSA and engage a security management program for at least a year. And I'm thinking, oh, this is great. You know, we'll have a program going, and we still don't have any firewalls up for a year. How is this supposed to work? But it turned out this person is actually somebody who sells these sort of services. So that's the lens that they were looking at. And so I thought, well, you know, it takes all kinds. There was one person who responded and said, in our organization, we have as many as 50 different technologies, but we really only make use of 4 of them. So you can imagine just how disparate this is. You know, we know in the military and financial services, they can afford to buy one of everything, and they usually do. In fact, if I had $1 for every vendor that said that BOA was a customer, Bank of America, I could stop doing this for a living. Bank of America buys everything, or they're apparently a large financial institution that everybody talks about, the one that has, you know, tried some of their stuff. So it's a huge, huge range. So let's talk about what people did answer. And I want to emphasize that I did not prompt anybody. This was not multiple choice. This was a completely open question. And because I wanted to see what people would say, what they would write down, what they would call it, in what order. Some of them prioritized them, some didn't. Some did a stream of consciousness sort of list. But these are the ones that came out the most often out of people. The blue are the total people who listed that technology in some form or another. And when I asked them what would be a total minimum, what would be a bare minimum out of what they listed, this is the green. So as you can see, despite everybody saying that AV and firewalls don't work very well, everybody listed AV and firewalls. Those were the most commonly listed technologies. And why is this? It's because you cannot not recommend AV and firewalls. You can't say, oh, no, you don't need them, leave them out. Nobody does that. If somebody does that, come see me after class, because I would love to talk with you about it. IDS and IPS, now you can see there's some divergence here between them listing it and saying that it's absolutely necessary. So IDS, IPS kind of, not everybody felt it was really necessary. General type monitoring, about half and half. Encryption, the same, and SIM. Now, if you take a look at these, does this remind you of anything? Exactly so.
Hey, Wendy, on the last slide, monitoring, it said general, right? So can you give some examples of what maybe they responded as monitoring?
Yeah, sometimes they just said the word monitoring, some kind of monitoring. Sometimes they were a little more specific and they said application monitoring, or they said network monitoring. Basically anything that did not have to do with collecting logs, or they didn't say the word SIM. But they said the word monitoring in some form or fashion. I counted that as monitoring.
There's no compliance or compliance as in policy-based, TRIPAR can do policy-based, not voluntary, enforce the CIS or obviously FISMA stuff. That kind of compliance.
They weren't terribly specific. They didn't write out all the different kinds of monitoring. Most of the time, they just said some sort of monitoring, or real-time monitoring, or we would have a SOC and we would do some monitoring. This was the sort of thing that they talked about.
No product specific at all.
Usually they didn't specify products. If they did, I left them out because I did not want this to be about vendors, just about general technologies. The other problem is, and maybe you've noticed this, that a lot of the terms that we were talking about are going away, or at least the new crop of vendors that I talk to most often are running away from a lot of these terms. They're saying, yes, we're big data analytics, we look at security events, but we're not a SIM. Or they say, oh, we're not signature-based antivirus, which is kind of a straw man because nobody uses just signatures anymore. They say, we detect, advanced persistent threats. And when I ask, well, how is that not IDS and IPS? They go, oh, well, that's not. It's not. Kevin Mandia gets really annoyed when I ask why his indicators of compromise are not signatures. He says, well, thousands of factors go into it. And I say, okay, it's a really big signature. But, so that all these terms are actually starting to go away, and vendors are distancing themselves from them. So depending on what people recommend, they may not be using the same words anymore. The other thing that we've discovered, we also have a service inside of 451 Research that interviews IT executives for an hour or more about what they're buying and why. And this is another case where we don't prompt them. We ask them, what are you using for application security? And if they say SharePoint, we write it down. And what we've found is that most of the users out there do not understand the jargon that we use in security. They are completely confused. Even inside of security, people are confused about the difference between a web application firewall and an application-aware firewall. And so there's so much nebulous stuff going on. I don't want to say cloudy, but that, we don't even know what we're talking about half the time. So having said that, this is what I was able to distill out of the answers that I got. And yes, it does look an awful lot like PCI. And the thing is that, PCI is really not that bad of a standard if you are simply trying to start with something and you need a list. It's a great list. It's a list.
When you thought of asking the question of that qualification, Ian and I did a presentation, we did this, and we saw when Carbon Black had done.
Yeah.
Oh my God, completely identical. What's prevention of that list, and then what's detection in that list?
Yeah.
And then what percentage of budget you spend on each? And right now, I know the only two presentations I've seen, Ian and I, and Carbon Black one, where we're almost reversed. Our opinions are completely reversed. I think we're the only ones successfully protecting. So that's good.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And in fact, I really hate when people say, oh, you should be spending more on detection than prevention, because if I'm a CISO and I've started with a budget that I've had for a couple of years, and I've had this much on these products, and I'm going to keep them in-house and they're all prevention, am I supposed to cut down my spending and maybe use fewer products in order to have money to spend on detection? Or should I just be going back to my boss and saying, I need more money now for detection? What does spending more on detection than prevention mean?
Well, we are detector. I mean, we have to change the way our reliance has been on these prevention devices. The bad guys are so incredibly good that some of the products just aren't working all that well. We pick a maybe great example.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of solutions are losing their effectiveness for cost benefit, almost an ROI. How much am I really benefiting now from these tools? They worked great 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. I got a lot of benefit out of it, but now they've just so gone by. Somebody had quoted in a presentation, bypass at will. That's Carbon Black. And I would say bypass detection at will, bypass prevention at will. They're absolutely masters.
Yeah, and we'll get to more of that. So yes, everybody's scared of PCI, but really it was a pretty good start considering the other answers that I got. Here are the next 6 most frequently listed ones, and you'll probably agree with all of them. Notice that application security was the next most, but it was only recommended about half the time as much as the other ones on the other slide. And this was from security professionals. Why would they not list application security as an absolute must? So, some of them said, yes, it would be good to have, but it's not a bare minimum.
But you asked for products, and a lot of application security, OWASP is not a product.
Yeah, there you go. No, I asked for technologies, not products. But there were people who did not say anything about application security. Again, these people that I interviewed had at least 10 years of security under their belts. There are a lot of people that we know and respect in the community. If they forgot to talk about application security, where does this leave us? Especially for people who don't know what they're supposed to buy. Web security, this is more along the lines of web filtering, stopping people from going to bad sites. DLP was, nobody thinks DLP is necessary. They listed it, but they said, no, this is not really necessary. Application firewall of some kind, XML firewall, WAF, anything else, identity and access management. These were all the ones that were next most frequently listed. And then I asked people, well, how many people do you think it would take to run this? And again, this is for a 1,000 person organization, because I had to do some scoping around it. And again, a lot of people said, well, I can't tell you what to buy until you tell me more about the organization. But I said, well, try anyway. Tell me something. Give me something. And so, one person said, hire one person and give them a whole bunch of open source software. I feel really sorry for that person. Really, really sorry. Yeah, exactly. But remember, when I started at my job, I was the one person. Although, to be fair, we did have people who were doing firewall-y stuff, outside of security. Somebody said I could easily overwork 12 people. And again, this is at a 1,000 person organization. Now, strangely enough, 5 years later, when I left TEA, I had 10 direct reports, and I had another team of 8 that was working on an IAM project for me. So this is kind of, growing up to where you kind of feel like you're getting a handle on stuff. One person decided to say that it would be, you took 15 or 20% of, the number of employees, and that would be the number of security people you should have, and they ended up with 30. We thought, no, that was ridiculous. So again, this is very much dependent on what your experience is and what you plan to do, what you think you can do, and what you can afford. Here's everything else that was listed in some form or fashion at least once, maybe not more than once. You know, some of the stuff is very, you know, new or fancy stuff, and usually the people who listed more technologies got around to listing these. Nobody likes NAC. Almost nobody likes NAC. Although we are seeing a resurgence of it, especially being driven by BYOD. And then I asked them, where did you get this list from? Where did you derive this from? Based on what? And most of them said experience. Some of them did say NIST, PCI, you know, SANS, but just about everybody, the majority, just said experience. They just kind of know. It's just conventional wisdom.
So the people on the right side are denying.
Well, you know, who knows? You know, it's if you are a seasoned professional and you go, well, I just know that everybody needs, you know, prevention technologies, and you need some sort of detection. You need to manage configurations across your enterprise. You know, you can come up with a basic one, but it's just what you've already seen working, what you've already used. We don't have any hard evidence to show whether any of those things actually works. It's very much, you know, shamanistic. This is our feeling. This is our conventional wisdom. This is what everybody says you ought to have, and yeah, I can see how it makes sense, so I'm going to list it too. It's just some sort of magic incantation that we list, and we do it from experience.
Did you ask a confidence level of this technology?
A confidence?
How confident are they that they really?
Oh, no, I didn't. And then I asked them what else would change their recommendation if they knew other things about the organization. And a lot of these make sense. The type of business, everybody said type of business. Regulatory requirements was another really big one. But again, that's compliance. That's not for effective security. But it's another threat that they have to manage to, the threat of the auditor versus, you know, the threat of the hacker. The budget and revenue, a lot of people were very pragmatic. It depends on how much money you have. That's how much security you buy. You know, and sadly, this is what happens. And data type and classification, only a few people actually mentioned that, which I thought was pretty funny. It doesn't really matter what type of data you have. It matters, you know, more what the regulator is going to say to you, what they say that you need to have.
Geographic location,
yeah. Yeah, geographic location, dispersion, for example. Yeah, go tell that to the people in Singapore. They're also very cranky in Singapore. They tend to take over your servers once you put them there. So, you know, geographically dispersed, you know, when you have a lot of branch offices, franchises, you know, all of that obviously will affect what you recommend for security. But the question is by how much? You know, isn't something across the board, if everybody needs to look at their logs, shouldn't we be able to, you know, say across the board, everybody needs log management? Isn't that something that we should be able to say? So then I took the most commonly mentioned ones and I went to vendors and I asked, how much would it cost for me to buy this for a 1,000 person enterprise? And I got the same reaction. We can't possibly tell you how much this costs until you tell us more about the enterprise. And now notice I did not go to companies and say, what did you pay for this? Because a lot of times they work out discounts, or, you know, there are all sorts of factors that go into how much they actually ended up paying for it that would have just muddied the waters. So I went to the vendors and said, you know, I want to buy this today. How much is this going to cost me? And I would say, sometimes I would call, you know, openly and say, you know, I'm an analyst, I'm looking for this. Sometimes I would say, you know, I would chat with their representative online, and I would pretend to be a person who's trying to make out a budget. And, you know, so I got these answers. So a lot of them would not give me answers, and so I did what I could with the data. But you can see the variation in here. The low, 113.3, the high is $475,000 if you spent the top end of whatever I was able to price. And then I took the average. If you think I should have done the median, see me after class, I don't even know. What significance doing an average as opposed to a median as opposed to any other slice of this data, but if you have a good idea, I'm all ears.
There's no way to know is accurate. The average is probably the low, and the high is probably the real.
Well, it depends. I talk to MSSPs, I talk to box vendors, I talk to vendors who sold these things as a SaaS, and actually all of the prices were pretty much the same across the board. Those vendors all pay attention to each other in the prices. They know who they're competing against, and they try to get parity with their pricing.
Well, if you eliminate config management, it's much more stable. Like half the high is config management.
Yeah, can you talk about that $250,000 anomaly there for configuration management?
Well, it depends on what you classify as configuration management. And an enterprise license with GRC and bells and whistles, and you're configuring your whole enterprise. I forget which product that was, but I wouldn't say which vendor it was anyway. But of these huge monolithic sort of things that you get from a large vendor, and you get an enterprise license, and it's $500,000. We've all seen those.
The other interesting thing about this is the firewall, low, high, and average are the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed firewalls cost more than
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was one where I was not able to get prices out of a lot of vendors. In some cases, where the technology is very commoditized, they often already have the price up on their website. So it was easy. I could just go to that. So if it's more commoditized, they will tell you the price. If it isn't, they keep it a well-guarded secret. And so even the ones that I got here, I had to aggregate. I cannot tell you about individual vendors because I promised I wouldn't. So what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is that if you hired one person, and again, I took a sample, I think I took the average salary from a survey that somebody had done of security professionals. I think it was like $92,000 a year, and added all of the HR costs onto it. If you hired one person and all open source software, this is how much you would have to budget for this 1,000 person enterprise. If you did more of a middle of the road thing, or the highest plus a staff of 4, not even the 12, but a staff of 4, that's almost $1.5 million. All of this means that if you're the poor CISO who's sitting there with an Excel spreadsheet and you're trying to budget for what you need for security, you could be off by as much as a factor of 4 or 5. And that's pretty scary. So it is really, really scary. And the question is, how much of this is going to be affordable for an SMB of 1,000 people? I don't know if you consider 1,000 employee enterprise to be small, medium, it depends on who you talk to. But can they afford $1.5 million? Can they afford $225,000? It really depends. The day when I came into TEA and they said, we need your budget by the end of the day, I think I put in like a $2,000 budget. I asked for a logging server and a couple of books. And the person I was reporting to scribbled it all out and said, where do you think you are, the private sector? And so I had a budget of 0 when I started. And I know that there are I have had other colleagues in this city who have started out with 0 budget and often stayed that way for a couple of years. So $225,000, I would have been laughed out of the agency if I had started with that. But that's what it would have cost. So the thing is that you may hate PCI, but at least it is a very concrete, very prescriptive list of technologies. It tells you when you're done. And as a result, we're seeing that used as shorthand for other areas. For example, MSSPs tell us that they are getting requests for PCI-type bundles from their customers because their customers don't know what to ask for. And they say, even if they don't have to comply with it, they say, well, this looks pretty good. This is a good list. It's got reporting. Sure, we'll take that. So this is how PCI is becoming shorthand for a required level of security. And so that really ought to scare you because we all know this is not enough, but it's the only thing we have. So if we're going to make this better, what are we supposed to do with this? How are we going to make it better? I don't know. This is something where we need to come together as an industry and figure this out. Open source plus staff might work, and in some cases it's actually cheaper. In South America, for example, they have a big services economy, so that services are very, very cheap. They're a lot cheaper than products. So there's a lot more open source use there with a lot more consultants behind it. We have the opposite thing here. Talent is very expensive. It's very hard to get. It's hard to tell when you've gotten it. If you have somebody in front of you that you're interviewing, what are you going to do? Are you going to ask them for their CISSP? How are you going to tell that you are hiring the right security talent? Even as a security person, I know when I talk to somebody, I know, what I have and who I'm talking to. But somebody who is in a small enterprise who knows nothing about security is not going to know this. They're going to go for the CISSP because they've heard that, this is the easiest thing to ask for. This could be too expensive. Even the open source thing could be too expensive. I can't see one person trying to run all 7 technologies that somebody would need as a bare minimum. I just can't see it. 2, 3, 4 people, running it, or maybe doing it, time slicing it. You have a half an FTE here and a half an FTE here, which is really good for reading logs because I love it when somebody who has 5 other jobs has to take time to try to read logs. It's never going to happen. So, you need a certain amount of dedicated mind share to be able to focus on security. If you don't have it, are these technologies going to do you any good if you can't use them properly? So will MSSPs save us? Maybe, and there are MSSPs that specialize in smaller enterprises, where they just say, we don't know what to do, we don't know what we need, we're just going to hand this over to you and tell us if we need to do something. Give us a call if we're owned. A lot of them end up having to do that. I don't know.
They're not cheap.
Yeah.
Those secure examples.
Yeah. And again, it depends. I've talked with smaller MSSPs who are cheaper, and it depends on what type of services you get. These things do not come automatically, with a SaaS, but it may be that it will be easier for these smaller companies just to, move everything over to a secure email provider, for example, rather than trying to get somebody who understands how to secure email in their environment. A lot of people do this. And I believe that we're actually seeing this, that most of the migration to the cloud is based on very granular, very well understood non-core business functions, like email. There isn't too much variance in email anymore. You know exactly what you're going to get. You know what kind of security you need around it, most of it having to do with not getting viruses and spam. So a lot of people have moved, happily moved their stuff to the cloud. Gmail's right there. HR is moving to the cloud. Accounting, if you count ADP, we've had business process outsourcing on that for decades. We're seeing a lot of customer relationship management. Salesforce.com is huge. It's getting huger by the day. Again, it's well understood. You don't need a lot of variation. People have tried to write their own, but it's really bad idea. They don't need to. It's easy for them to move over to Salesforce. So I think that's how we're going to see these things. And hopefully with a SaaS, they have a pretty solid security set in the stack already, hopefully. I know that's not a given, but most of the high-end end users that I talk to generally feel that if it's a SaaS, they generally have a pretty good security model all the way down. That's what they're telling me. That's what they feel. I don't know. Arsenic left. I was going to ask him how many of these he's tested to find out how many SaaS providers are really secure. But that could be the only way to go instead of them trying to secure what they currently have.
I know for a lot of times when we've looked, so as a bigger company, right, you can go and talk to the SaaS providers and try to get them to provide some evidence.
Yeah.
And there's been several times when you look under the covers of different SaaS companies where the back end is pretty horrible. and like where they can't even tell you anything. It's not that it's a bad structure. It's literally they have no idea what's going on underneath the covers or how anything works.
Yeah.
And so they're just like, well, take it or leave it.
Salesforce.
I'm not backing on Salesforce, but
I'll do it.
but there are several that we've seen where it's like some are great, right? You look under the covers and it's great, and some are terrible. But if you're small enough that you can't do it yourself, like you can't. One, they're not going to give you the information you're asking for, and two, you can't evaluate it anyway.
Exactly. You can't evaluate it. And you can't fix what you have because generally, if you are a smaller enterprise and you have very few IT resources, you've got a whole lot of dynamics going on there so that even lowering the price on something is not going to help you. You know, you're going to have antiquated legacy equipment. It's going to be run by your CEO's cousin Bob, or it's run by a third party and you have no control over it, where they say, oh, we'll fix it if you pay us. So, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff that they just simply cannot do. You know, examples of if you only have a few servers, you're going to pile everything onto them until they can't run anymore. And this is exactly opposite to segregation of duties or network segmentation or anything. So maybe MSSPs is the way if we can work out a model that's sustainable and affordable and vetted that, you know, actually works. Or we move everybody to SaaS, things that have, again, that have been vetted sufficiently. I don't know, but this is a good thing for us to be talking about, I think. So talk amongst yourselves. I'm going to have a moment. Any other great suggestions, comments?
I didn't see anything about patching.
Yeah.
You're right. I actually did put that. Yeah, I put that into configuration management. I thought about leaving it separate, but then I threw it together because data.
I completely agree with your findings. Don't get me wrong. Our industry is doing that, and I'm here to tell you it's completely wrong. I could probably do all that with free technologies.
Well, you can do the next talk on how you would do it, because that's the other thing. We don't have anybody brave enough to get up on stage and say this is what works. Because it's like going pull.
Yeah, I'll tell you right here, you got to have a firewall, no doubt about it. You got to have the access controls. You need a product like Big Fix, and you need logging, period. Anything else, its return on investment is so small that your biggest gain from APT, honest to God, changing watching going on in your environment, the behavior, logging is going to do that, and configuration management stuff like Big Fix or Canyon, you throw the rest out. I'm telling you, the amount of effort you spend, the amount of hours, the amount of people you need, worth it.
How many people agree with him? Okay, we got one. Excellent. You too.
Big environment of thousands of
I'll
people.
back up my statement because I have
Okay.
something to qualify my agreement. I think that a lot of the product that is sold, and I'm a technology background, math major, and I've done a lot of marketing and sales, not for product management. So I've seen the whole spectrum of the job profiles. And with the marketing and sales, and the reason why a lot of people aren't using some of the vocabulary is because it doesn't work. I think there's a lot of product, you can call it shelfware or whatever, that does not work and does a disservice. And you can go to a trade show or places and they're newbies trying to learn what to use, and there's a lot of marketing that's thrown at them. And so I think that in some senses we do a disservice. And then I think your minimalist approach has a lot of merit, because then at least you're not led astray using things that don't work. Because I think that's the real foul, the real harm, is using things that don't work.
I'm also exploiting the tools to their utmost capability, unlike I'm expecting a product. I'll even use an example. Everybody here knows what Tripwire is, the file integrity solution. Mm-hmm. There's a fundamental flaw with the way, anybody here managed Tripwire? So they know where I'm coming from.
Just competed against them.
Yeah, so Tripwire is one of the better security products. It's actually not bad. We use it and it has a lot of good benefits. The problem is there's this concept of stop points in Tripwire. And stop points means I get a lot of noise as an administrator. I'm looking at a box, there's a lot of changes. And this stuff is just not where I need to look. So I put the stop point in there and I stop looking at that point. I'll crawl down that directory. But we're seeing APT going 5 directories deep specifically because of the way Tripwire is architected. And the way maybe not architected, because you don't have to do that. But the reality is that's what administrators do. Everybody does this. So therefore, if I put my malware another level of 2 or 3 deep, you're never going to pick it up with Tripwire, for example. And it's a flaw of us administrators doing it. But they know what we know, they know how we do it because they used to be us or are us at the same time. And so even though those technologies are really good, we have to exploit these tools and really understand, okay, you can't do this and here's why. Oh, this really isn't practical, this isn't why. And also these were designed way back when we were a lot smaller. We didn't use them everywhere, and now we're using these tools everywhere, and we really exceeded the capabilities. So less tools, really exploit what they can do, really expand upon what they do, spend all your effort there, and be really good at it. You'll have so few roles to find time.
So are you saying that you're not getting owned at all? What you're doing now works
Okay,
for
so
you,
here's
you're
another
not
premise. So Ian and I believe the endpoint is completely volatile. You cannot protect the endpoint. Forget it. You can't do it. Windows is fundamentally broken. I don't care how much you lock it down. I don't care what you do with it. Sure, unplug the internet. It'll get phone. Your users surf the internet. There's too many apps. There's too many ODays. Struts. Pick one. Adobe. Anything. Java. Everything. You can't protect against that. You just can't. So the reality is your endpoint's going to get popped. And the reality is, if you take that concept and say, I'm going to let that happen, but I'm going to immediately react upon that occurring, then from that aspect, no, we are not owned. Do the endpoints get popped and can detect it? Yes. The 210 days for us is maybe 210 seconds or 210
Okay,
days.
so you're saying this model works for you for responding to every security threat. Will it work for, one, can you prove it? And
Yes,
two, can it work for anybody else?
Yes, yes, for everybody.
Is this a reference architecture that we can sell to everybody else and say, this is what's going to work?
You can go by Splunk or pick your log management solution you can really exploit. You can go by BigFix or Tanium and really exploit it, yes.
So I think there's also bias in the language that you asked the question on too, because you said, what do you need to create a security shop? So, or what was the exact language of the question?
I just said they've never done security before. Yeah. I'm asking you to tell me what to buy.
Okay, so do security. I could get firewalls and do these things, and I say, hey, I've got a security shop. I'm doing security.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean if my organization is going to be
well,
safe.
remember, these were all security pros.
Right.
Would any of them stop short?
So, if the goal was how can I make the most secure shop, it's like, okay, I'll spend no money and my company won't be connected to the internet. Love it.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's not
wire cutters.
That's not what we're actually trying to say. We're trying to say, how much money do I need to spend to make sure my company is PCI compliant?
No, how much is enough security? I didn't even qualify what the end goal was or, any of the criteria. I wanted them to list things until they stopped, until they felt it was enough. And, these are people we all know and love who are, very well respected in the community, a lot of them. So this is the problem. And, Michael, with all due respect, I think if it were that easy, everybody would be doing it by now. I don't think there's any one reference architecture.
We are very, look at the talent that's behind the products I talked about. You've got to have staff that can understand, A, what they're doing in the box, and B, how to exploit these solutions. You can't take a security administrator who just says, I do tripwire, and expect that talent to be able to do what I just said. You've got to have talent. There's no doubt about it. So maybe that's...
You need talent, and it's been at least my experience that for any given security problem, let's say detection, that you have in an enterprise, part of it is the problem itself. You will have the same problem no matter, it's the theoretical part of the problem. A much bigger portion of it is the environment in which you're having that problem. Because there's so many constraints on what you're having to do, what technology you're trying to do this with, what technology you have, the political climate, the people, the culture, whether things are outsourced and not under your control. All these sort of things contribute to the context of the problem. And then there's a small portion that's, maybe you're just not doing it right. Thank you.